The world today feels like a whirlwind war. Famine, pollution, and yes, pineapple on pizza. I said what I said. Still, even with all the madness, we are living in the most technologically advanced age humanity has ever seen. Our daily comforts would have seemed like magic to our ancestors. But let's rewind for a moment, because if you go back far enough, life wasn't just difficult, it was relentless. The Ice Age was no fairy tale. It was a harsh, frozen crucible that forged some of the most durable and physically formidable human species ever known, like the Neanderthals. These weren't ordinary hominins. Their physiques was so intense, you might call them biologically engineered for survival. Now here's the twist. What if I told you they weren't the only Ice Age heavyweights? There was another group equally fierce, equally wild. But this time, they weren't just a branch of us. They were us. Well, almost so. Who were they? How did they thrive in a world dominated by towering beasts? And more importantly, where did they go? Stick around, because today we're stepping into the Ice Age stronghold of Cro-Magnon and the first true trailblazers of ancient Europe. Let's jump in. Cro-Magnons were early modern humans, likely the first of their kind to set foot in Europe. They are thought to have arrived roughly 56,800 years ago, deep in the late Pleistocene. Our knowledge about them begins with an important discovery in France in 1868, when scientists excavated a cave later named Cro-Magnon, where they found multiple human remains, including parts of skulls and postcranial bones. At first glance, scholars thought they'd stumbled upon an entirely separate species because of several unexpected anatomical quirks. But over time, the resemblance between these ancient humans and us became undeniable. Today, we categorize them as European Early Modern Humans, EMH for short. That designation stems from key physical features: a rounded cranium, straight posture, smooth facial structure, lighter brow ridges, and a strongly defined chin. Interestingly, all of those traits still exist in us today. Even their overall bone structure closely mirrors our own. Had you crossed paths with one in what is now Iceland or continental Europe, chances are you'd think they looked familiar, unlike the Neanderthals, who bore more visibly divergent traits. Still, Cro-Magnons weren't carbon copies of us. There were differences, and noticeable ones at that. From the start, it was clear these weren't people you'd casually provoke. They looked like they'd stepped straight out of an ancient action film. That imposing physicality is part of why early scientists mistook them for a separate human type. The earliest Cro-Magnons especially were uniquely proportioned. Their stature stood out. They were, quite literally, giants for their age. Studies of adult Cro-Magnon remains indicate that, on average, their height closely matched that of post-industrial modern humans. Females generally stood around 5 feet 4 inches, while males typically measured over 5 feet 9 inches. This made them notably taller than today's global average, an impressive detail considering that modern people are already among the tallest in our species' history. When placed alongside other human groups of the same period, their height becomes even more striking, and it wasn't even their upper limit. Some Cro-Magnon populations were exceptionally tall. One group found in Eastern Europe had individuals ranging from 5 feet 10 inches to 6 feet 2 inches. To give that context, if such a group were considered a nation, those at the upper end would statistically qualify as the tallest people on the planet. Even taller, Cro-Magnon males existed. Some remains measure up to 6 feet 3 inches, which exceeds the average height of an NFL athlete. And they weren't just tall, they were built with remarkable physical strength. Although their skeletons shared the same basic structure as ours, Cro-Magnons had far more robust frames. Their bones were thicker, broader, and denser. This difference was visible throughout the body, but especially emphasized in areas like the shoulders and legs. For instance, a mid-sized Cro-Magnon's clavicle could measure up to 19 centimeters, about 25% longer than the current average. This extra length gave them superior mechanical advantage, enabling more forceful and wide-ranging arm swings, especially useful in close combat with handheld weapons. Their muscular build was not speculative. It's strongly supported by skeletal analysis. Research comparing equally tall Cro-Magnon and modern humans suggests the ancient individuals were roughly 20% heavier, largely due to increased lean muscle mass. This almost excessive strength wasn't overkill, it was a biological necessity. Life in Ice Age Europe demanded extraordinary toughness, and fossil evidence shows many Cro-Magnons bore signs of significant trauma and still survived. At one particular Cro-Magnon rock shelter, numerous remains revealed infections, and a majority had fused neck vertebrae, likely the result of serious injuries. One female specimen, for example, displayed evidence of a severe skull fracture that had partially healed over time, indicating she lived for quite a while after the injury occurred. These people weren't just survivors, they were remarkably resilient, built to endure a world of constant physical challenges and punishing conditions, and to truly emphasize how difficult their existence was. The very first Cro-Magnon ever discovered, known as Cro-Magnon 1, lived through an extraordinarily harsh life. His skull and facial bones were heavily marked with damage, believed to have resulted from a genetic condition that caused numerous tumors and cysts. Yet, despite these severe health issues, researchers found clear evidence from his skeleton that he had reached adulthood and, by Cro-Magnon standards, was considered fairly old at the time of death. Of course, attaining old age during that era didn't demand a particularly long lifespan. For Cro-Magnons, the average life expectancy rarely exceeded 40 years, similar to patterns seen in Neanderthals, who also faced brutal living conditions. As a result, scholars conclude that early death was a routine part of life during the Ice Age. However, surviving longer wasn't the only advantage tied to a sturdy and durable frame. Their solid, muscular bodies were also critical for surviving rugged environments and successfully bringing down prey. This resilience was essential, considering the kinds of animals they frequently hunted. Fossil records suggest Cro-Magnons often pursued large Ice Age megafauna, including horses, reindeer, bison, ibex, and on rare occasions even woolly mammoths, massive beasts by any definition. Furthermore, unearthed animal remains show both pre- and post-mortem injuries clearly associated with human activity, reinforcing the idea that Cro-Magnons were exceptionally capable hunters. Even top predators of that era weren't immune. Large carnivores like saber-toothed cats, hyenas, and ancient bears were also killed, using Cro-Magnon tactics, most often with spears crafted from bone or stone. Interestingly, many of the creatures they hunted are now extinct, whether regionally like Ice Age hyenas or globally like woolly mammoths and orcas. Scientists have long connected at least part of these extinctions to early human intervention. It's a pattern we continue to see echoed in the modern age, and the Cro-Magnon approach to hunting went far beyond just spears. These early humans displayed an extraordinary level of skill with a wide variety of weapons, both for close-range combat and distance attacks. Their toolkits included spear throwers, javelins, knives, clubs, nets, boomerangs, and possibly even early prototypes of bat. Many of these weapons came in diverse forms, some tipped with specialized points, others designed with ergonomic grips, highlighting both their ingenuity and adaptability. Still, the powerful weaponry and physical prowess of Cro-Magnons weren't always reserved for fighting animals. Much like us, they carried the capacity to turn violent against their own. In fact, violence between humans was not unheard of. Remember that skull injury mentioned earlier? It appears that such damage, particularly blunt force trauma to the head, was relatively common among Cro-Magnons, and in several cases, these wounds show patterns that strongly suggest they were inflicted by fellow humans. One of the most striking cases comes from Cro-Magnon 2, a male individual who lived more than 30,000 years ago. He sustained a brutal blow to the face, likely inflicted by a slow but powerful blunt instrument. Though the impact didn't kill him immediately, it ultimately cost him his life, as he died before the injury could properly heal. Detailed analysis indicates that, prior to his death, he experienced serious internal trauma, including hemorrhaging and brain hematomas, and he wasn't alone. Additional remains with crushed skulls suggest that the head was a frequent target during episodes of violence, but not every fatal encounter involved the skull. Another Cro-Magnon, known as Gear 1, was discovered with a deep slice through his upper spine. This wound would have instantly disrupted blood flow to the brain, resulting in death within seconds, considering the harsh Ice Age environment. It's likely that such acts of violence were driven by desperate struggles over territory, nutrition, and reproductive opportunities. These clashes weren't mindless, they were battles for survival. While modern humans understand fighting over food, the consequences back then were far more deadly. In fact, some archaeological clues suggest that a few victims may have been eaten by their killers. This disturbing idea gains traction from a discovery in Goff's Cave, England, where skull caps roughly 15,000 years old were unearthed. These crania appear to have been shaped into bowls or vessels, hinting at the chilling possibility of cannibalism. And that wasn't the only unsettling evidence found within the cave's depths. Bones from multiple individuals showed signs of deliberate butchering. Knives had been used to methodically strip away muscle, tendons, and soft tissue. The bones themselves were broken and bore tooth marks, indicating they had been chewed on to access the rich marrow inside. Even more alarming, of the 3 identified victims, 2 were children. This suggests that not all prehistoric humans used their strength for survival alone. Some, like today, may have used it for darker purposes. This pattern isn't exclusive to it extends to their close cousins, the Neanderthals, who lived alongside them in Europe for thousands of years. The dynamics between these 2 species remain a topic of intense debate, especially since Neanderthals vanished not long after Cro-Magnons appeared on the scene. This timeline has led some scholars to theorize that interspecies violence may have contributed to the Neanderthals' demise. Though prehistoric conflict is no longer believed to be the chief cause of Neanderthal extinction, current research indicates that violence still played a role. In fact, new evidence has cast Cro-Magnons as leading suspects in a fifth case involving a Neanderthal who died under violent circumstances. This individual was discovered with a serious rib wound, apparently delivered by a weapon tipped with stone, resulting in what appears to have been a relatively quick demise. While this may seem like limited evidence, additional examination has led experts to propose an intriguing explanation. The direction of the injury, along with the signs of low energy force, points to the use of a ranged weapon. This detail is noteworthy, as Neanderthals are not believed to have utilized projectile tools unlike Cro-Magnons, who had become proficient with them. As a result, the most widely accepted interpretation is that this Neanderthal was struck down by a spear or dart hurled from a distance, most likely by a Cro-Magnon. This encounter highlights the tactical, edge-ranged weapons gave early modern humans, although they were not as physically strong as Neanderthals. Cro-Magnons' advanced hunting gear may have offered them an advantage in close competition. In addition to violence, there is also some indication that Neanderthals may have been perceived as potential prey. One fossilized Neanderthal jawbone was found bearing incisions that closely resembled those on butchered deer remains processed by the fine, intentional markings matched cutting methods associated with early modern humans, leading some scholars to entertain the possibility of cannibalism. Still, this interpretation is far from confirmed. It is plausible the jawbone was used for symbolic or ritual purposes instead of being eaten. Furthermore, although the grooves on the jaw seem to be they don't conclusively indicate the Neanderthal was killed by there remains the possibility that the individual was already deceased before the incisions were made. All considered, while the data does point to violent episodes between Neanderthals and their modern human cousins, such interactions may not have been the norm. In fact, genetic evidence offers strong support for interbreeding between the 2 species. Curiously, it was the earlier Cro-Magnon groups that appear to have shared the closest ties with Neanderthals. A particularly compelling case is that of Oase1, a 40,000-year-old human. DNA revealed that roughly 9% of their genome came from Neanderthal ancestry. This implies that one of their relatives, perhaps a great-great-grandparent, was a full Neanderthal. The relatively high level of Neanderthal DNA has prompted some scientists to propose that the earliest Cro-Magnons may have shown subtle Neanderthal-like features. Fossil evidence reveals that early Cro-Magnon skulls sometimes had slightly flattened cranial vaults and distinct occipital projection traits commonly associated with Neanderthals. Yet, over time, these features and the proportion of Neanderthal ancestry gradually faded. At the same time, other signature Cro-Magnon traits, including their notable physical sturdiness, began to diminish as well. These evolutionary shifts are believed to be influenced, at least in part, by the environmental stressors during the last glacial maximum, a period marked by extreme habitat disruption and significant pressure on Cro-Magnon survival. Still, some key characteristics remained, such as their strong jaw structure and comparatively large craniums. Their sizable skulls had practical significance, allowing room for larger teeth and adaptation, likely tied to a diet that included not only meat, but also hard to chew items like seeds, roots, and nuts. But beyond housing their teeth, these large craniums supported something even more remarkable: their brains. Among the most compelling aspects of Cro-Magnon anatomy is their extraordinary brain size, which even exceeded that of modern Homo sapiens. Indeed, their average brain volume was much closer to Neanderthals, estimated around 1,514 cubic centimeters, in contrast to the modern human average of about 1,350 cubic centimeters. One possible contributor to this increased volume was the notably larger frontal and occipital lobes found in these brain regions, both of which were longer than those in today's humans, are essential for various higher-order thinking processes and motor coordination. Even so, the full extent of how their larger brains influence behavior and thought remains unclear. We cannot say with certainty how their cognitive abilities compare to ours, but it is plausible to believe they were at least equally intelligent. Currently, 5 major cultural complexes spanning close to 40,000 years have been linked to Cro-Magnon populations. These include the Iranian, Grevetian, and Magdalenian eras, each marked by remarkable leaps in technology and artistic expression. The brilliance of Cro-Magnons extended beyond their crafted tools. True intelligence lies not just in what is built, but in the ways it is applied. Take their hunting practices. For example, Cro-Magnons devised complex strategies that timed mass kills to align with the seasonal migrations of large animals. Using coordinated game drive techniques, they channeled prey into natural traps, deep cliffs, rivers, or narrow valleys where the animals could be dispatched in bulk. During times when big game was scarce, they shifted their focus to aquatic environments, timing their harvests to maximize fish yields and incorporating seafood into their diets. Some bands likely shadowed herds year-round, remaining close enough to ensure constant access to fresh meat without needing to trek long distances. Their adaptability wasn't limited to hunting either. They showed advanced knowledge in gathering and processing plant foods. Archaeological findings indicate they consumed an impressive range of at least 150 plant species, including seeds, nuts, roots, fruits, and tubers, demonstrating extensive botanical knowledge. Perhaps one of their most remarkable achievements was the early domestication of animals, specifically the dog. Fossil evidence of Paleolithic dogs found near Cro-Magnon habitations, such as a 36,000-year-old canine specimen unearthed in Belgium, suggests a deep association. Supporting this is the discovery of a 15,000-year-old burial of a man and woman accompanied by a dog, pointing to the animal's likely role in daily life, possibly aiding in hunts or guarding their encampments. On the subject of Cro-Magnons also excelled in constructing well-organized shelters, reflecting their practical intelligence and adaptability. Depending on the landscape, they alternated between cave dwellings and open-air settlements. In the latter, they built large huts, using mammoth bones, particularly skulls, as structural supports. These frameworks were then covered with grasses or animal hides to provide insulation, creating primitive but effective protection against the harsh Ice Age cold. Many of these shelters featured central hearths and clearly defined areas for various tasks, allowing Cro-Magnons to live and work efficiently even under extreme weather conditions. However, the internal layout of these homes varied. Smaller structures lacked additional rooms or divisions, while larger ones often supported multi-use spaces. Such dwellings were vital to their survival, offering essential warmth and safety. Evidence indicates that fires were typically kept burning within the huts themselves, not outside, highlighting their importance for maintaining indoor temperatures during long, frozen nights. Still, despite the comfort these homes provided, Cro-Magnons were not confined to them indefinitely. Their living spaces were deliberately structured, with clearly marked zones for fire pits, meal preparation, sleeping quarters, and areas reserved for processing animal remains. Archaeological discoveries also revealed that Cro-Magnon communities built several seasonal camps, enabling them to rotate between locations according to the time of year. This movement allowed them to respond to shifting resource patterns and prevented the depletion of any single site. From the analysis of skeletal evidence across different locations, scientists believe these settlements were modest in size, rarely accommodating more than a few dozen people at once. Yet, despite their small numbers, these groups were not isolated. Cro-Magnons fostered wide-reaching social connections, consistently engaging with neighboring populations, and this wasn't limited to occasional exchange. his evidence points to the presence of organized trade systems that extended across vast stretches of Europe. Materials like flint, marine shells, and mineral pigments had been traced back to origins over 120 miles, or roughly 200 kilometers, from their discovery sites. This exchange system played a critical role in survival. For some groups, trade wasn't just helpful, it was essential. Scholars propose that certain Cro-Magnon bands relied so extensively on exchanged goods that they may not have survived without them, especially during the harshest phase of the Ice Age, when direct access to resources became increasingly limited. This system of exchange did more than ensure physical survival, it supported the flourishing of early culture. Clothing, ornamentation, and even artistic creations traveled between camps, indicating that Cro-Magnon sought more than shelter and sustenance. Among these, visual expression held an important place, often taking the form of personal decoration. Red ochre was applied in artistic patterns on the skin covering the face, limbs, and torso, with designs that ranged from dots to detailed images of animals and humans. They also practiced more permanent forms of self-adornment, including tattoos, scarification, and piercings, though such procedures were likely less widespread due to the medical risks they posed. Beyond body art, the enduring legacy of their creative impulse is most vividly seen in their cave paintings. Dozens of decorated caves have been unearthed, with Chauvet Cave in France being one of the most iconic. These murals primarily depict animals: lions, mammoths, bison, deer, horses, and oxen are common subjects. Occasionally, more abstract figures appear, including fantastical hybrids with human and animal features, hinting at symbolic or mythic beliefs. In terms of human forms, Cro-Magnons seemed especially drawn to specific anatomical features, particularly reproductive ones. The famous Venus figurines, carved repeatedly over generations, stand as striking examples of this fascination. But for those who find less interest in erotic themes, rest assured that Cro-Magnon creativity extended beyond such imagery. They also participated in musical activities, suggesting that even amid the challenges of prehistoric life, Cro-Magnons made space for rhythm, sound, and artistic expression. Though not the first humans to engage in musical expression, they are believed to have crafted some of the most intricate musical styles of their era. Much like their diverse tools and hunting gear, their instruments came in many shapes and functions. Excavations have revealed flutes, whistles, percussive instruments, bull roarers, and indicating that Cro-Magnon musicians commanded a rich and varied sonic toolkit. These early sound tools likely enabled them to compose layered rhythms and melodic patterns, potentially leading to songs and even the earliest forms of musical traditions. In fact, their level of musical development was so refined that many researchers now believe much of prehistoric music has been lost to time. It's unlikely that such sophistication emerged suddenly without a long lineage of musical experimentation behind it. Curious what their music might have sounded like. Reconstructed, bone flutes offer an audible peek into their soundscape, creating tones that are surprisingly sophisticated even to modern ears. Clearly, Cro-Magnons adjusted remarkably well to the challenging climate of the Ice Age. That naturally leads us to ask, what became of them? The truth is, they never completely vanished. Cro-Magnons thrived during the final stretch of the Pleistocene and achieved notable success as a human group. Although the brutal cold of the last glacial maximum restricted where they could settle, they still managed to adapt and expand. They didn't merely survive, they reproduced at high rates for thousands of years, a trait that far outpaced their Neanderthal peers. This reproductive strength may have been key to their dominance across Europe. As their population surged, the total number of humans on the continent multiplied dramatically. By roughly 13,000 years ago, estimates suggest there were more than 70,000 Cro-Magnons living in Europe. While small by current standards, that figure represented a tremendous population for its time. Whereas many early hominin groups vanished completely, Cro-Magnons were not entirely lost. Instead, scholars propose they gradually blended into later European populations. As new waves of migrants entered the region, their cultural history appears to have unfolded in stages, starting with the Aurignacian phase, then progressing through the Gravettian, Solutrean, and finally culminating in the Magdalenian tradition, which spanned from about 17,000 to 12,000 years ago, and is regarded as the last clearly Cro-Magnon phase. After this cultural period ended, traces of Cro-Magnon DNA became more scarce. Still, Genetic research reveals that their descendants lived on well into the Neolithic period, as evidenced by remains unearthed in parts of France and Spain, though the modern human genome holds only fragments of their lineage. Echoes of Cro-Magnon ancestry continue to exist in European gene pools today, and thus, the tale of Cro-Magnon seems to conclude, or does it? From daring foragers to trailblazers of the Ice Age, they were more than just hardy survivors. But what do you think? Were Cro-Magnons the apex humans of prehistory? Share your opinions in the comments below. Click the video on your screen now to keep diving into more discoveries. We'll see you in the next one.